Hello, thanks for joining us for the first Strengthening Families Networking webinar of 2020. My name is Kaylin O'Connor from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and I'm glad that so many of you are able to join us today. We are going to focus today on building blocks for early learning communities and how that relates to protective factors for families. So I will get us into our overview here. These webinars are held once a month, always on the second Thursday of the month, and it is an open invitation. You are welcome to join anytime the topic is of interest to you, and you're welcome to invite others to join when there's a topic you think they would be interested in. It's always somewhat related in some way to our Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework and the various ways that people are implementing it around the country. And we jointly convene these between my organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and our partners at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. Each month we have a different topic, and we always welcome your suggestions for speakers. You're volunteering to be a speaker to share some work that you've done, or even if you don't have content to fill an entire webinar, if you have a topic you'd like to share, I can help find others who are doing related work, and we can have a joint webinar. So let me know if you've got a topic. There are recordings and materials from past webinars for many years now that are all posted on the Google site listed here. That link is always in the follow-up email that comes out after the webinar. It's also, we always link to that from the Strengthening Families e-update newsletter that goes out. So you can get to that in multiple ways, but I will point out today the handouts for the webinar are in the panel on the right side of your screen. So you can click on handouts, and one of those handouts is actually just the slides for today in case you wanted those. We made those into a PDF, should be easy to download, and then we have a couple other handouts there that I'll reference later during the call. Our upcoming webinars will be on the second Thursday of each month throughout the year, so mark your calendar. I would recommend you put a hold on your calendar for this time and then register if the topic is of interest, and if not, you get that hour back. But nice to be able to join when you can. But as I said, we always record it. And if you register, you do get an email afterwards, even if you didn't attend, that includes a link to the recording. So we want to make sure that you can get this content, whether you're available at the exact time or not. Our February 13th topic, I'm still finalizing the arrangements with presenters, so I will send that out soon. You'll see it in a Strengthening Families e-update newsletter probably towards the end of this month. But you could also find it on our events page at our website, on that Google site that the Alliance maintains, and I usually also post it on Facebook, so it's out there in the world. You can find the registration link and the topic once we get it up there. So for today, I'm going to share a few updates from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and then Martha Reeder will share some updates from the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. And I will be our presenter today. That's not our usual approach, but I'm also presenting the main topic, which is about building blocks for early learning communities and how they connect to protective factors. All right, there I am. We'll jump right in. I wanted to share some exciting news that came out towards the end of the year or just before the holidays. CSSP has announced that our new president is Judith Meltzer. Many of you have met Judy over the years. She has been our executive vice president and a co-leader of CSSP for many years, and she's agreed to take on this role upon Frank Farrow's retirement after being our president for many years. So we're very grateful that Judy is staying on and in this role and helping to lead us through this transition. And I hope that many of you who have met her will share my enthusiasm, and if you haven't met her yet or been familiar with her work, I think you'll have chances to do that as we go forward. So I just wanted to share that exciting announcement. We are very happy about it at CSSP. This year, very soon, I will be sending out some information requests to all of our state leads to update the information that we maintain about our Strengthening Families National Network. What you see on your screen right now is a map of the national network. This map has been pretty static for a few years. We haven't added a new state in a little while, and we also haven't removed any states in a while, although I do know that in a few states the Strengthening Families work is not currently active. So if you look on our website at the link there, just our page about the Strengthening Families National Network, you will see We have a state profile for each state that is carrying out state-level coordinated cross-system strengthening families work, and those follow a template. If your state does not have one of those and you would like to create one, please let me know. I can send you the template. If your state has one but it's out of date, I will be in touch very soon about updating that, and we will remove the ones that are 4 or 5 years old and not being updated, because we want to make sure that we have an accurate picture of who's really doing strengthening families work. On that note, some of the states that are not listed on this map as being part of our network, I know you've got great strengthening families work going on, and I'd love to get that formalized, to add you to the network, create one of those profiles, and make sure that when we talk about how people are implementing strengthening families around the country, we're doing so in a way that represents what you're doing, so that you're getting the credit for it, and so that other people in your state who want to connect to strengthening families know where to go and who to talk to. So please reach out if you are in one of those states that's either white or light blue and you think your state is ready to join the network. I heard from one such person this morning. I'm excited, so I haven't responded yet. And if you are in one of the states that is in the network, just know that I will be getting in touch with the state leads. If you're in a state that's in the network but you're not connected to who the state leads are or what the state level work is, I encourage you to look at the profile on the website, figure out who that is in your state, and connect to them so that, again, they're aware of what you're doing and what resources you can share with others in the state, and you can tap into resources of those other partners in the state. So just trying to beef up our data about who's doing what and make sure that we have an accurate representation of it. So those of you who are state leads will hear from me soon, and I encourage you to reach out to me if your state would like to join the network. I also want to say, when you look on the site, you will see the profiles for most of the states that are currently in the network. I want to give a shout out to Jeanette Meyer from Georgia, who just sent me an update to their profile. I haven't, reviewed it and put it up on the website yet, but it will be there soon. And all of you who are state leads, you can do that anytime. Update your profile so that it reflects your most current work and contact information, and we can always update that. But this year, in the next couple months, I will be reaching out to formally make sure that we have up-to-date information on all of those. Okay, another piece of work from CSSP I wanted to share, which you may have heard about a little bit, is that we're developing a body of work around the concept of early relational health and doing some work with Frameworks Institute, other partners, doing focus groups with parents and pediatricians and others to figure out how we can define this concept of early relational health that we think could really be a paradigm shift for our field of early childhood and how we're thinking about what is going on between infants and toddlers and their parents and other caregivers, where they are really building those foundational skills for relational health throughout the lifespan, but focusing on what's going on in those early serve and return interactions, supporting that rapid brain development. Everything we know about early childhood and the importance of those relationships, we're trying to capture into this concept of early relational health and figure out how we can use that to communicate and shape work going forward. So there's a survey out right now. Would really encourage you to respond to it, whether you're saying early relational health, I've never heard of that, or if you're saying, wow, that sounds like everything I'm doing and I want to make sure my work is represented. We want to hear from you. If you're working in this field and you've got opinions and thoughts about this concept, the wording, the framing, we'd love for you to respond to the survey. It's out until January 20th. And it also has been going out in our newsletters recently, so you can, if you get any of our newsletters, I think you may have seen that link. So please click on that and respond by January 20th. Also, just a reminder again that we are getting closer to our October conference, Together for Families conference. This is co-hosted with the National Family Support Network, CSSP, Be Strong Families, Families Canada, and this year the City of Seattle Human Services Department. So we are having the conference in Seattle in October. We're very excited. We held this conference for the first time in 2018, and I think everyone who attended agreed that it was a great idea to bring those strands together and to be together focusing on strengthening families, family support more generally, and the standards of quality for family support that come from the National Family Support Network. So I encourage you to put those dates on your calendar soon we'll be looking for folks to help review proposals. Soon will be the announcement for proposals, so you can propose a session, and hope you will attend and bring a team and make the most of this opportunity to connect with your colleagues from across the country, as well as this year from Canada. All right, I'm going to hand off to Martha Reeder to share an update from the Children's Trust Fund Alliance.
Thank you, Kaylin. I am excited to be here this afternoon and thank all of you for showing up, and we're looking forward to hearing from Kaylin and her presentation in just a minute. I wanted to remind you that our work at the Alliance with parents is really important to us at this time, and we're coming up to February, National Parent Leadership Month, and we will be launching our Partnership Academy. We had a sort of introductory webinar back in October, and we will be officially launching with our first hour-long webinar. Here is the registration link to that, and I'll put that into the chat box in just a moment. And we really see this as a kind of a journey of discovery, and we encourage you to take this journey with us. During the February webinar, we will be focusing on what it means to bring our best to the partnership, both as organizations and as parent leaders. And so we will be looking very specifically at one of the tools that our Alliance National Parent Partnership has created, called Creating Effective Parent Partnerships. And if you are an organization that works with parents, I encourage you very much to bring your parents onto this call, and please encourage them to participate, to register for the call. Share this registration link with them, because we want to have some good discussion between organizational partners and parent partners as well. So please do join us. I will be sending out some more information about that. Also, you want to keep checking the Alliance website, which is ctfalliance.org, because as we get a little closer to February, we will be posting some new resources that celebrate Parent Leadership Month. And to find those, you will just look under Partnering with Parents, which is a major section in our website. So that's all I have today. Thank you very much. Kaylin?
Oh, I'm sorry, I had been muted. Sorry about that. I was just thanking you, Martha, for sharing, and also noting that the new name of your organization is rolling off all our tongues much more easily now. We're all used to it, the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, but some on the call may have missed that transition at the end of last year, formerly the National Alliance of Children's Trust and Prevention Funds. The new name is more succinct and direct, and I think it's great. So just wanted to point that out for anyone who was confused.
Thanks for mentioning that, Kaylin.
All right, thank you, Martha. Well, now I'm going to hand off to our guest presenter today, which is actually me. So we are talking today about the building blocks for early learning communities, and a whole body of work that CSSP has been engaged in under the auspices of a project called Early Learning Nation. This was funded by the Bezos Family Foundation, and some of you have heard me talk about Early Learning Nation and the building blocks of early learning communities in other settings, but it's time now to really bring the conversation to all of you to explore what these building blocks are and how they might relate to your Strengthening Families work, because I think there are strong connections. There are some threads that run through the work as I think you'll see today. And I just am hoping this will be part presentation and part discussion, so that you can really let me know how you see these connections and whether you think these connections are helpful and in what ways. So today I will describe what those building blocks are of an early learning community. We'll have some time for conversation about how the protective factors relate to that and other community level work, how that all works together. That's a growing area of interest in our network. And then I will share the digital progress rating tool that just came out that provides a really nice, some guidance and tools for how you could work with others in your community to work towards becoming an early learning community. So I also want to point out that in not even in a week, next Tuesday, we have another webinar that is just about that digital progress rating tool. So a lot of the same content that I'll be sharing today without the linking to protective factors piece, but just sharing what building blocks of early learning communities are and how communities can get engaged. So I have the link later in a slide. You may want to encourage others in your community to check that out and join our Tuesday webinar if they just want to learn about what these new tools are. All right, so jumping in for today. These are the building blocks of early learning communities, and if you look in your handouts panel, you will see a handout that I think is just called Building Blocks One Pager that goes into more detail with what I'll be talking about today. These building blocks are designed to explain and describe what needs to be going on in a community in various sectors and in various aspects of how families live in communities so that young children's learning and development can be supported. And anyone who knows me knows that when I talk about supporting young children's early learning and development, I'm really talking about how we support their parents and their families. And a piece of it is also the service providers, care providers, early care and education teachers and classrooms and home-based providers and home visitors, but a lot of it is also about the families. So I bring that lens to all of my work, and we developed the building blocks in a process with some of our communities that are part of our early childhood learning and innovation network for communities. I'm stumbling over those words for some reason today. I will slow down a little bit. So we developed it with representatives from 7 of those communities who are doing really good local early childhood system building work, many of whom are also using Strengthening Families in that work, to talk about what needed to be in place for their community to be a place that everyone in the community was getting support they needed for young children's early learning and healthy development. What you'll see here in the 4 building blocks are that we really wanted to think broader than just the services, which is where our minds usually go. And when we think about the early childhood system, a lot of it is about services, but there's so much other important things that build around that. So we started with building block number 1, which is about community leadership, commitment, and public will. And I'm going to talk more about each of these, but just to talk about them broadly. The second one is, of course, the quality services that work for all young children and their families. The third is neighborhoods where families can thrive. And the fourth is policies that support and are responsive to families. So really getting outside of some of our comfort zone, what we think of when we think about supporting early learning, and thinking much more broadly about where families are living and how they are being supported to raise their kids. So in each of these building blocks, we articulate a set of what we call targets. We describe these as targets because they are sort of idealized statements. I haven't yet found a community anywhere that would be described by all of these statements as, you know, the ideal place to live. If you live in such a community, please tell me. I want to come visit, maybe move there. So each of these targets is an idealized statement. But what you'll see in one of the handouts that's available here in the webinar is called the At a Glance Guide, and that will show you within each of the targets, we drill that down to levels. So we say, what does that mean in a community that's just starting to work on this? What does it look like in a community that has this work underway? And what does it look like in a community that's really invested in this and has done a lot and is, you know, rock star level? So each of these targets has 3 levels within it, which you can see in that At a Glance Guide. I'll talk a little bit about what the targets are. So in building block 1, we start with that local leaders are working together across systems with a focus on early childhood, whether that's, you know, convened by the mayor's office or by the United Way. And I should mention that these communities could be a city, it could be a county, it could be a neighborhood within a city if that neighborhood has a lot of organizing and, a lot of infrastructure there. It could be in a more rural area, maybe larger than a county, could be a region. So there's a lot of different ways we can define a community, but however we're defining that, we want leaders from within that area to be coming together to work across systems. The second target is that the community invests in young children and families. And what you'll see in the levels for that one is we go up from sort of making the most of existing resources to really finding and investing new money and sustainable money in early childhood work. The third is about community members supporting and understanding the importance of early childhood health, learning, and well-being. So there are a lot of tools and campaigns and different ways that we can get that information out, but we do think it's important that the community is getting information about early childhood and understanding how critical that phase of development is. 4 and 5 are about the supports that are available to families. Number 4 is a rich network of informal supports is available. That's one of our harder ones to measure, but our community leaders felt that was so critical, and it is one of the less tangible things that really helps you feel like you're in a community where families have a lot of support. And then the 5th one, closely related to that, is that community resources for children and families are well-known, accessible, and easy to use. So between those two, I kind of like to say, if you're a parent and your 2-year-old is experiencing a speech delay or you're concerned that they might be, you either know how to start reaching out for help about that, or your neighbor does and you know your neighbor, right? So you have ways to access formal services when you need them, and sometimes that will be through your informal support. And of course, you are fluent in strengthening families, so we're talking here about social connections and concrete support in times of need and how the two of those often interplay. So the second building block, we get into quality services that work for all young children and their families. And here we go through sort of a continuum of the basic services that everyone needs access to, the screening and referral for additional risks and needs, and then the more intensive services for families and children who need them. So those are the first 3 targets, kind of a progression from universal to targeted services. Then we have target 2.4, one near and dear to all of our hearts, is that families and parents are actively engaged as partners. And we mean in all of those services as well as in decision-making at the community level. Supports are in place for service providers, so capacity building, training, career pathways, things like mental health consulting, infant mental health consulting, all of that would be considered supports for service providers. And then that leaders use data to drive change. So there are mechanisms for gathering and integrating and looking at the data across your community, and it's being used proactively to make sure that services are working, the right people are being reached, all of that goes with the data. Okay, building block 3 is about neighborhoods. And this is an area that the early childhood field is kind of just starting to dip a toe into. There's a lot of other work has been going on about neighborhoods with more or less consideration of families with young children in particular. And now the field of early childhood is thinking more and more about neighborhoods as well. So I think that's a positive thing. We're meeting in the middle, learning about each other's work. So the first target here is about the built environment, promoting safety and allowing families to access basic services in their neighborhoods and beyond. So we're not saying that every single neighborhood has every service a family would need, but that you have public transportation or at least easily accessible ways to get from a neighborhood to where the services are located, so that you don't have communities that are sort of cut off from the services they would need. The second is economic and employment opportunities are available to all, so that, again, families, parents can get to where they need to be for work, for education, for banking, all of that. That's not in the world of early childhood, but it matters so much for families, safety and security. And then the third one, another one of our intangible targets, not completely intangible, that residents feel a sense of belonging and hope within their neighborhoods and connection to the broader community. So this is that sense of collective efficacy that, when we have a problem in our neighborhood, we come together and we solve it. We feel empowered. We know that our community, our neighborhood matters to the rest of our city or community. All of those things that, again, might be harder to measure in some ways, but are really critical to how a neighborhood feels and how invested in the neighborhood the residents are, and all of that really matters for families with young children. And then in the fourth building block, we talk about policies that support and are responsive to families. So this again goes from the policies that govern child and family services, which we want to be equitable and responsive to how families actually need services to be provided. So for example, if 4-year-old kindergarten is being implemented, is it being implemented in a way that really helps the families who need it the most? Or is it just sort of being done without input from families? Then we get to workplace and other policies supporting families and raising children. So here we're talking about family-friendly policies that might be implemented at a city level or might be implemented at an employer level, but that the city can be supportive of. So paid family leave, sick leave, minimum wage, all of these things that we know really matter, but we usually don't touch on in the early childhood field as much. Although I think that's changing. We're not the only ones starting to push that, but really looking at how those issues affect families' economic security, stress levels, and just ability to provide nurturing care for their children. And finally, we look at land use and community development policies. So much bigger picture, but the things that matter for those neighborhood questions we raised before, things about zoning and green space, and just whether there's a look at how things impact families as policies are put in place. Some communities do that really well. Most, it might not even really be on the table when you're making some of these other decisions at the county board that don't have the word children in them, really looking at the impact that they have on families. So does anyone have questions about the building blocks and this sort of structure of how we talk about them? I will mention, if you have a question, you can raise your hand to be unmuted, or you can type into the question box and I can read your question. Okay, doesn't seem like there are any questions right now. So I'm going to jump into bridging between everything I just talked about and strengthening families. You are all on this webinar, so I'm assuming that you have at least some familiarity with strengthening families and the protective factors framework. And I want to talk about how those are related to these building blocks and to our other, broader thinking about strengthening families, where strengthening families comes out of child abuse and neglect prevention, as well as promoting optimal development and strengthening families, clearly. And the building blocks come from a focus on early learning, but with a really holistic approach to thinking about families and communities. And I think they overlap significantly despite having different points of origin in terms of what the primary desired outcome was. So I just wanted to dig in on that a little bit. Many of you have seen this graphic before. This is our daisy. It shows all the different systems that touch a family's life, or that might touch a family's life. And at the center are families and protective factors. We use this daisy to illustrate how having the shared language of protective factors can unite those fields that often are working with families in pretty different ways or for different reasons. And then we also like to add that all of these systems exist within a community, that families are not, just families don't say, I live in such and such a early care and education center with this pediatrician and this children's mental health service. It's a community that you live in that has so many other factors that influence these services and systems, but are all related. We did get a comment from Jeanette Bell-Reeve saying, I like that these building blocks are so broad and comprehensive. Thank you, Jeanette. Thanks for entering a comment, and I'm glad you like them. So within strengthening families, we've often had this reminder that we need to think about communities more broadly, and recently we've been moving more towards thinking about what that actually looks like and wondering about how it's already being done around the country and what people are already doing. So the question that I want to ask is sort of what can our communities be doing in each of these building blocks to ensure that families have opportunities and supports to build their protective factors? That's where I think these two frameworks come together. Some of the building blocks relate very strongly to one or more protective factors, but I think in each of these building blocks, we can see how there are opportunities to make sure that families have that support. So I'm curious to know your thoughts. I've actually got a couple of polls. So you can type a longer thought into the question box if you like, but I'm also going to put up a poll about which of the building blocks are you currently focusing on in your Strengthening Families implementation. And you can check any of those boxes that apply. Just curious to see how many folks on the call would say they're working in each of these different areas. So I'll leave that up here, and as I said, you can also type in a longer comment if you'd like. But I'll leave this up for a little while before I close it, then you'll all be able to see the results. And it looks like someone has their hand raised, but I can't find who. Oh, our friend Maureen. Maureen, often your hand is raised. I know we've had this before, something about your computer. So maybe type in if you'd actually like to be unmuted to say something. But I'm going to go back to our poll. And I'm going to close it now. The responses have mostly stopped coming in. And I think you can see the results. So this is really interesting. 69% said you're currently working in the area of commitment to early childhood as a priority. 59% in quality services that work for all. 31% in neighborhoods, and 41% in policies. So I would have predicted that building block 2 would have been the strongest. So it's interesting to see that building block 1 was actually the strongest. I am not surprised that neighborhoods building block 3 was the lowest. Actually, I think 31% is pretty good. And 41% focusing on policy. I'm glad to see that. Let me see a question that was typed in. Okay, hold on a second. I see a question was typed in that's actually about one of the other updates I shared, so I will come back to that at the end. I want to go to our second poll, which is about how you could see using the building blocks in your community or your state. I know many of you are working at the state level, and so you might be picturing how this could work with community level folks you are working with, or just how you might use them even at the state level where they were conceived of for the community level. And again, if you've got another thought on that, go ahead and type it into the question box. I will note that the last option there is become an early learning community separate from Strengthening Families. So that's just to say, we're just going to use this tool. We don't need to connect it to our Strengthening Families work, but we like the building blocks and we like the concept of an early learning community. And that is fine. Not everything has to be connected. All right, I see lots of questions, or lots of responses coming in, I should say. And I will close the poll now so that we can show the results. There we go. Okay, so similar levels saying engage new partners, expand the focus of our Strengthening Families work, and enhance our work at the neighborhood level. Those are all over 50%. 65% up with the expanding the focus of our Strengthening Families work, 39% enhancing our policy advocacy work, and then 23% who think you might use this to work on becoming an early learning community even without it being connected to your Strengthening Families work. So thank you all for responding to that, and I hope that you will type in further thoughts that you have about whether and how this is useful and where you could see it advancing your work. Or if you don't really think it could, I'd like to hear that too. I'm always open to that feedback too. Trying to kind of feel out how much our Strengthening Families Network wants to use this, and that will help us determine, what other opportunities to share related to that. So I'm going to go on to our next slide, although you are welcome to still type in answers to questions and we can keep this conversation going. So I wanted to just step back a little bit and share more. As I mentioned, this interest in community protective factors has been growing within our network and among our partners. So currently, we have a small group of local, state, and national partners who have formed an informal working group focused on community protective factors. We have been working on a survey that we'll be sending out soon and hope that many of you will respond to about the community level work you're doing, whether you define that as being specifically for child abuse and neglect prevention, or if you define it as promoting child and family well-being, or if you are in with both of those, as many of us are. But we want to know what you're doing, what frameworks and tools you're using, how you see it fitting with your Strengthening Families work and the framework itself, because we know there's a lot of interest in the field, and we want to figure out the best way to move forward. Following the survey, we are planning to do a literature review, and so the survey will help us know, what we need to include in that literature review that we might not already know about, and will also just tell us sort of where the field currently is and where the interest is to move it forward. So that will be coming out soon. It will go out in all our usual ways, in the newsletter and on our website and everything, but I will also specifically send it to everyone who registered for today's webinar, because I think you have indicated that this might be a topic you're interested in, and I'd love to make sure that we hear from you. I'm slowing down to see if any other questions were typed in, but it doesn't look like it at this point. So I'm going to continue and get into what it really looks like to become an early learning community. So this work, as I said, started with our communities that were already doing a lot of local early childhood system building, and we developed those building blocks, but we also developed what we call a roadmap for early learning communities, and it includes these 6 steps, which I will zoom in on so you can see them better. This is not rocket science. This is very general sort of collective impact type of work. How do you bring stakeholders together and get on the same page and work towards shared goals? But it is laid out in a way that's specific to early childhood work, and I think just useful to help people, particularly if you're just kind of getting started. If you don't have an existing group in your community, or if you have something that's sort of dwindled and hasn't been very active lately, this could be a good way to revitalize it. So the first step we talk about is assembling stakeholders with an interest in early childhood, and that should be a broad and diverse group, as diverse as you can get, both in terms of, what type of system people are engaged in and whether people are engaged professionally in this work or are parents and residents who really care. We want diversity across what neighborhoods are represented, the racial and ethnic and linguistic backgrounds that are represented in your community should be represented in this group, so that you're really getting everyone's perspective on what needs to happen to make your community a truly supportive place for young children and their families. And as I said, in some places that group might already exist, but it might need to be strengthened or re-upped, and this can be a good tool to use to do that. So then we suggest designating a point person. I think we've all been on committees where no one is really in charge and everyone has great ideas, and then you come back to the next meeting and everyone still has those great ideas. You need a point person who's going to make sure that things happen between meetings and who's going to, keep an eye on who's actively participating and who might need to be pulled back in or who's missing from the table, all of that work. In the digital tool that I'm going to share, you have to designate one person as a community lead. That's a particular sign-in to this tool who can then see responses from other stakeholders who also use the tool. So that there does need to be a designated person for that purpose, although of course in the real world that role might be split out amongst 2 or 3 people who then can share a login to our system if they need to. But that idea of having someone or some people who are responsible for making the group actually get the work done is really important. So then the next step is to assess your community's progress. We have this progress rating tool that I'll be sharing. It's built around the building blocks and those targets and levels that I mentioned. The idea is to have multiple people complete this so that you get that broad input, and that could happen through using the digital tool. It could also happen by sitting around a table and talking through each of the building blocks, depending on your group and your, people's availability and willingness to do something at a computer versus coming to a meeting. All of those factors will be different, and they might even be different for different stakeholders in your community. But in whatever way you do it, you need to get a lot of people's input to assess your community's progress. And throughout all of the building blocks, you'll see a strong emphasis on equity and on closing gaps. So a lot of the work is about seeing where there are gaps and figuring out ways to close them. So saying, you know what, we have a really strong 4-year-old kindergarten program, but families from this neighborhood don't have one that's easy for them to get to. Or parents who are working a night shift don't have a way to access that. So, or don't have access to infant and toddler care. We know that's a huge challenge in a lot of communities. So kind of seeing where there are gaps and where things might be going really well for some people in the community, those are the opportunities to say, what can we take that's working really well for some or in some places and expand it so that it also serves everyone else it needs to. The 4th step is to develop an action plan, and I will show you how the digital tool leads you right into building an action plan, but you can also do that more manually, and this will sound familiar to those of you who have used the Strengthening Family Self-Assessment tools. The idea is to help you get something actionable from doing that assessment, because just an assessment tells you where you are, but you need to figure out how you want to get where you're going, and the action plan does that. 5th, we have check-in with parents and other important stakeholders to find the best solutions. Now, as I said, we're hoping that parents are at the table from the beginning, but there might be a broader group of parents that you want to come to then say, hey, we've got an action plan about improving, infant toddler care for families who work unpredictable shifts. What do you think would work? Tell me what you need. So really, drilling down to we're at the action planning level, and we need a lot of input from the people this will affect. Even if you've had parents at the table helping to make those plans, getting input from a wider group. And I'm mentioning parents, but service providers are really important in this too. So some of the decisions that you're making directly affect or rely on service providers to implement them well, and so you need those people to be part of your planning process as you get beyond the idealistic sort of action planning step to really making something happen on the ground. And then, of course, you want to regularly review your progress, and whether that means going back and doing the full assessment again, or if it just means checking in on your action plan and, checking off the items you've completed and updating ones that still need more work or that fell to the wayside and need to be brought back up. But to have it be a continuous process of looking back at what you've done and what you still want to do, and maybe what opportunities you have now that you didn't have before that you could continue making improvements. All right, so I'm going to show a little video that explains the digital tool I was talking about. Let me pull that up, and we will show progress rating tool video. All right, everyone. I apologize. I think some people had trouble with the audio, and I hope you can hear me now. I hope that you were able to hear that. If not, you can go to earlylearningnation.com, and the video is right there at the top of the page. So apologize for difficulties there. This GoToWebinar video thing doesn't quite always work the way we want it to. Okay, so as you saw, that described what the tool was all about, and our little playground metaphor of that every playground is different but has a lot of the same elements. So just like that, each community is going to put the pieces together in different ways, but we can see what is consistent across them and how they all work together. That varies by community, but there are similarities that we can learn from. So I'm going to actually go to the tool now so that you can see what it looks like. I think I'm going to the tool now. Oh yeah, I opened it twice. Okay, so when we are on the earlylearningnation.com screen, that video is right there. For those of you who couldn't hear it, I apologize. You can watch it when we're done. And we've got actually the registration link for next week's webinar, an article about what an early learning community is, and then other great content from Early Learning Nation. So I encourage you to check that out. And from there, you can click into the progress rating tool. And this goes through content that will look familiar about the steps that we just talked through. But actually, at any point, you can, from up here, you can click in to start the progress rating tool. So I'm going to sign in. You can see I'm Kaylin Stakeholder. And so this is for someone who's not the designated community lead, but who is a stakeholder in the community. I've just been told that you're not seeing my screen. I apologize for that. I think it was doing the nice thing where it doesn't show everything. Let's see. I hope people can see now. Okay. Okay, people can see it. Thank you. Man, I'm getting too fancy with these things, trying to jump around. So I was showing that you can click straight from the earlylearningnation.com website, click on Progress Rating Tool, and it takes you here. You can set up an account. If you want to be the community lead for your community, that will require approval, so you have to fill out a form saying what community you're representing, and then we can approve that and hopefully quickly get back to you that you can set up the community. But if you just want to go in and check it out, you can set up an account and attach yourself to my community, which is called Demo Community for Kids. You are all welcome in Demo Community. So it allows you to go in there and see what it looks like in case you're considering using this. So when you go into the survey, actually, let me go back. We'll go into building block 4, which I haven't even started yet. So you can see, you will see a series of questions. You answer one, it jumps to the next. And so you just rate each of these for whether you think your community is not even started on this type of thing or is doing this really well already. So I'll answer a few. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, and clearly I'm not reading these as I go. But for each building block, there's I'd say 30 to 60 questions for the stakeholder, and more questions when you go in as the community lead. So it is not insignificant, but it is doable, especially if you take it one building block at a time. And I will now go back where you can see your survey results. So I'll go to the quality services one. I made a point earlier to go through and create a few action steps so that you could see how this works. When you're in the view results, you can flip through each of the targets and see how we describe that target, and then each of the levels and what kind of ratings you've been given. And then you see the proposed actions. If you select something that you want to add to your plan. As a stakeholder, it's called your advocacy plan because you're advocating that these things should be part of what your community is going to do next. And then as a community lead, it's the action plan, which you can pull from things that others have selected in their advocacy plan. Now, when I go to view my advocacy plan, any step that I've selected, I can now add critical information, a due date, a budget, progress indicator to just write, how are you going to know that this is getting done, whether that's, we're going to get at least 10 responses to such and such a question, we're going to get, provide a training and so many people will come, whatever that might be, how you're going to know whether you're achieving it. Then the responsible entity, existing programs and resources contributing, and more resources that are needed. So you can add those in. What you'll also see is that for each, for the building blocks, there are resources there, additional tools you might want to use, some tips, some examples from communities. So for example, this example about mental health consulting explains sort of what that is as something that's closely related to Target 2.3, where my action step came from. And then you can print your advocacy plan, which will show everything you've already put in and the resources that go with each of them. So you could take that to a meeting to talk with the community lead about what you think should be added to the action plan, or the community lead can collect all of those. So that's the tool. I am not going to continue going through this. As I said, I'll be doing a webinar next Tuesday where I'll go through all of this without the conversation about protective factors in the middle, so I'll have a little more time to dig in on intricacies of using the tool, and hopefully many of you can join that as well. I did want to point out, for those of you who weren't able to see my screen, which I think was everyone except me for a little minute there earlier, you can see that video I played is right here at the top of the earlylearningnation.com page. So you can always go there, play that little video. It's about 2 minutes, easy one to send to people to let them know what this is that you're talking about and give them an early sense of what it looks like. So I encourage you to check out earlylearningnation.com, and I'm going back to the slides, which I hope you can see now. I will make sure. Okay, I think you can all see my screen. So I'm going to keep going. I've touched on most of these points already, but just to make sure, one thing that I think is really important and that has been coming up with the communities that are currently using this is, and some of you have heard me say something very similar to this about strengthening families in the past. When you do that self-assessment or when you do this progress rating tool, you will have different stakeholders whose perspectives are very different, where one person will say, oh yeah, our city's doing this, and another person will say, never heard of it. We're definitely not doing this. That is a really important thing to dig into and figure out, because sometimes that means somebody budgeted for this or said it should happen and it's not happening. Sometimes it means this is happening, but only in a few places and not enough people know about it. And so that can actually be kind of an easier one. If it means that, something's happening in 5 neighborhoods, but it needs to happen in 10, that's kind of easier to replicate than starting something from scratch. But sometimes it will mean someone is implementing something that they think meets this statement about, what families need, and someone, probably a family member, a parent, is saying, no, what you're doing is not meeting that need for my family. And so that opens up a conversation that can be challenging, but also really gets to truly meeting families' needs in a way that will be helpful. I think I'm going to jump ahead here so that we have time to answer a couple of questions that have come in. I'll leave this up with some of that information about how to encourage people to learn more about this. That note about you can register as a community lead, or you can go in as a stakeholder and just attach to demo Community for Kids for now. And I would love to hear from you if you're pursuing this in your community, and especially if you are connecting it to your Strengthening Families work. So I saw some questions that came in. So I want to address those. One I should definitely address. Elizabeth Cheney asked, will this tool be replacing the existing strengthening family self-assessment, and will it be a fee-based model? So there are two questions there. The answer to both is no. This is not replacing strengthening family self-assessment, because this is really thinking about what's going on in the community with broad strokes. And the strengthening family self-assessment is for a home visiting program, an early care and education program, a home-based program, or a community-based program like a family resource center. So those are very specific to an agency or a program, and get into pretty nitty-gritty, things about how you're working with the families that walk through the door. This is more at the community level. It includes questions about, like, are the programs in your community working with parents in the way that we hope they will, where you might end up pivoting then to the strengthening families content to help programs do better at that. But this is for a different type of audience and assessing at a different level. And the question about whether it will be fee-based, this is all funded by the Bezos Family Foundation, and they are very, very committed to keeping it free and available for anyone who wants to use it. Similar to their Room content, which is the brain building tips for parents, that is also something they have committed to always making available for free. And so this is part of their offering to the world to support early childhood. And I don't anticipate that there would ever be a fee attached to it. There was also a question here about whether you could use this tool to assess your agency. And I think there are some pieces of it that would be relevant for an agency, depending on your type of agency as well. If you are a public health department, maybe this is more relevant than if you're an agency that is just providing one particular service. If you are a Head Start, you might be able to look at some of these questions that really are about community connections. But I think in any case, if you're trying to use this tool to assess how your agency is doing, you would want to have outside partners involved in that, because there will necessarily be things where you need an outside perspective on how well your agency is reaching the community. And you also would need outside partners to help implement some of the things that you might think are priorities. So it's not really designed to be used at the agency level, but if you take a look at it and see what you think, you may disagree with me, and I'd love to hear that. If you think it could be applied to an agency, and what type of agency, I'm sure would matter a lot there. One other thing I will mention, although we do need to wrap up soon, is that all of these materials are available on our website as PDFs of the documents with all this content. And let's see, I'll go here where you can see our website, cssp.org. The Early Learning Community Action Guide is an enormous PDF document, all of which is now content on that digital tool. But if you just want to look at it and flip through it, it might be easier to do at the level of like that at-a-glance guide that you can see in the handouts here, or going to our website and downloading the PDF and looking through it in that way. Once you look at it there, I think you'll be able to see whether it would apply for the type of agency you're thinking about, or whether strengthening families assessment might be more appropriate for your agency, or if you'd want to work with other partners to think whole community for the questions that are being asked here. So with that, I did want to answer one other question that came in about the early relational health survey, although I see the person who asked it had to leave. So I will just contact that person directly, and I will thank everyone else for joining us today. I hope it was useful, and I hope that you'll let me know if you're going to be using these tools and how you're finding them useful. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.